asked about my role in the ministry here as one of the ministers, especially in the reconciliation, which is the area of mercy and the mercy of God. And yeah, for me, I was many years in leadership and other roles elsewhere, but now I'm back in pastoral work full-time, and I love this ministry. We at St. Francis, as you know, offer a great deal, 21 hours of confessional presence every week. So for me, it's a chance to meet people in their struggles and their suffering and their aspirations. And so for me, it's like anything else, it's times of frustration and times of joy, and sometimes times of deep pain when you realize the suffering that some people go through. That shift of emphasis from confession to reconciliation is very real, I think, because so many people now are quite happy about a face-to-face encounter. Some will still come in and hide, and we try to respect that. But you can often see a striking difference when you say, would you like to talk about things? And one example I remember particularly, a person came in and gave a long list of sins and sounded rather depressing. And I said, how do you reckon you're going spiritually? And then totally different picture emerged. So, of course, it's not about the person telling me, but telling the Lord through me. But there is an important difference here, because then we're able to talk about what was really going on. And the sins were real enough, but they didn't have the proportion that it looked like. And so I think that has been extremely important. And one of the most touching things is when someone feels you've understood them, because that you can't do if you just simply hear the sins, give absolution, the person disappears. And one person in particular I remember recently was a very good man, doing lots of wonderful things, but he had a struggle in one area, and he just visibly relaxed, and he said, thank you, he said, too often I get reprimands. And so we were able to talk about the issues, and I think one thing that's very important, we've learned a lot from psychology and neurology, brain science, that many behaviors are compulsive. And so people can't simply choose not to do them. It's a process. And to be understood on that is very important, I think, because many people are saddened, are angry with themselves. Why don't I change? And so once you help them to realize if you come regularly, we can deal with an issue step by step. There's going to be relapses and so on. And their brain science has helped enormously, and especially in the area of pornography, but also even in things like habitual lying or something. We often ask, okay, that you do that, why do you think you do that? And that seems to be to open things up wonderfully, because then you help people to realize that many of our wrongs are actually symptoms of something else that's deeper. Sometimes it's stress at work, and a person comes home and gets angry with the kids. So we don't talk about getting angry with the kids so much, first about the stress and how could you handle it better. So there is that therapeutic dimension, which is part of the intrinsic nature of the sacrament of healing therapy. And our, what we call auricular confession, emerged out of spiritual direction of the Irish monks when they came to Europe in the early Middle Ages, and their spiritual direction evolved into auricular confession, and then they got totally separated. Now, of course, in the confessional we have limited time, but there is that element, I think, that needs to be there, that's true healing. And when you were talking about reconciliation, there's a lot of dimensions. One is, of course, we are reconciled with God from whom we've in some way separated. but also with the church as a community of healing and fellowship. And sometimes it's about reconciling with loved ones or with enemies or people at work, who knows. And so reconciliation is many-faceted, and reconciling with yourself. That's one of the most touching episodes I had in years. Was a person who came in and confessed something of 20 years before. And I said, has that been confessed? Yes. Well, why are you repeating it? And what we found as we explored was that this person had never forgiven herself. And we saw that what was blocking her from truly receiving God's forgiveness was her own unforgivingness towards herself. In a way, that's true. And I sometimes say to people who are in compulsive problems that they can't immediately get out of, to ask God for forgiveness immediately and receive it, but then mention it next time in confession. So now, why should we mention it in confession? And I think here there are multiple reasons. We know in the field of psychotherapy that usually, the person who's their own doctor has a fool as a doctor. We need dialogue to understand. And I think to separate sin from other dimensions of the personality is a mistake, because we're incarnate beings, we're whole, we're feelings, we're spirit, we're emotions, we're body. And so what we call our sins are harmful things. And here I'll just add something, by the way, if you don't mind, that people sometimes come in and say, why does the church make this a sin? And I say, what do you think sins are? That one day the church says this is a sin and that's not. It's about what's healthy and what helps our growth and our dignity and makes us contribute to the good life of humankind. And so I think that's part of the issue, that it's about our incarnate embodiedness in a society, in human relations, in work and nature and all the rest. And that the issues that emerge, we need dialogue, and that's the whole development in modern times of psychotherapy. But of course it existed long before in spiritual direction, because we're blind to many things in ourselves and we need that. And then there's a dimension of church, that it's the confessor represents the community that welcomes someone who's in some way broken. And therefore I think maybe when we're young we can get pretty rigid about certain things because we're uncertain. And so as you get a little bit older, and you can often gain more understanding, and because people change us. What Pope Francis is wonderful in communicating is this sense of mercy, because he lived it concretely. He used to go and hear the confessions of prostitutes in the evening and go into the poor places in the slums. And those slums I visited once or twice in South America when I was on my work. And there everyone had a photo of the Archbishop, because he'd given them communion or confirmation. He'd been there to meet them. I think the contact with people's sufferings, and also the joy they have in discovering God in their lives, or of feeling that they've been understood and that someone has offered a word of solace, a word of healing that comes from the Lord, that changes us, and profoundly. And you start to feel with people much more, I think. And so I think it's that human dimension of reconciliation that we lost when I was growing up. It was very scary. And you went into that dark box and this figure said words in Latin, and you were terrified to talk about anything sexual or whatever. And I think today to say, look, these are human problems, let's talk about them. It changes us, it changes the person. And I think that's the work of Christ in the church, bringing out the full depth of our humanity. Because his loving grace has got to penetrate into every dimension of our being. And we all have doors inside that are locked very closely, tightly. And so if we can help each other unlock those doors, then, you know, a lot of muck comes out, and then there's healing. Yes, you're asking about this healing of the blind man, the restoration of sight in the confessor, but also in the person and the community. Yeah, I think that's a rather important one. What we see when we look at each other, when we look at ourselves. And in one sense, the reconciliation ministry could be thought to be very unhealthy. You're asked to look at what's going wrong. And that's why it has to be within the horizon of the immense love of the Lord. And Pope Francis loves that episode, who doesn't, of the adulterous woman, when she's condemned by everyone. And she's scorned, she's humiliated, she's terrified. And he asks that very simple question, does no one condemn you? And she looks around and says, no one, nor do I. And that's the real model, as is another one I love, is the episode of the so-called sinful woman with Simon the Pharisee. You know, she's behaving in a way that's shocking. She's sneaked around the back there, sitting on or lying on divans, and his feet are against the wall, and she sneaks around behind. And of course, Simon's thinking, what the hell is she doing, that woman? And you know, no doubt all the other men, because it's only men at that banquet, are thinking the same. And Jesus does nothing. And she knows that he accepts it. And then she audaciously loosens her hair in that Middle East and kisses his feet. And of course, this is profoundly shocking. Jesus should repulse her, they think. And then he says to Simon, did you notice this woman? I think that's one of the funniest things in the gospel. He's done nothing else but think of this woman. And so he very subtly shows Simon, invites Simon to see himself and this woman in a completely different frame. And he's really inviting all the spectators there, all the participants, to say, this woman truly loves. Do you? And I think those episode after episode are like that. Jesus invites us to see the sinner in a different light. You know, when he goes to Zacchaeus' place, he's going to that rotter, what's wrong? You know? And then he opens his heart, Zacchaeus, and says, Zacchaeus says, I've given all this money, and if I've earned more, I'll give it. So I think that sight element is very important. And I think it's very important for the confessor to see this person is made in the image of God, and no matter what they've done wrong, that image is what we've got to keep in mind. And bring to mind in the person, this is the image to which you're called to harmonize. And so I think that's the same with the community. In the privacy of the individual reconciliation, of course, the community has little place. And that's one of the limitations of that form. But it is about restoring the community too. And that's why reconciliation, of course, can't be totally separated from Eucharist. And I must say I often use reconciliation in preaching as just to make that connection, the restoration into the community. And of course it's teaching us to humbly accept our own sins and therefore to undercut the tendency that we all have to blame others, externalizing our own guilt by putting it onto others rather than deal with it ourselves. And that's very important, I think. We see in recent politics this scapegoating. You scapegoat migrants, you scapegoat other people of other races. And what's that? That's a refusal to allow ourselves to be judged, and we externalize it onto others. So in that way, rather indirectly, it is a purification of sight. It's saying, look at the other through your own sins, and therefore be humble. And that's a lifelong task, of course, for all of us. But it's a very important warning for the confessor. Who are you to judge?